Titao was once described as a red zone, a town under pressure, a place where fear dictated the rhythm of daily life. For years, headlines associated it with attacks, displacement, and uncertainty. But today, Titao stands as something very different. It has become a living example of how a shift in military doctrine can change not only the battlefield, but the psychology of an entire nation. For older generations who have seen conflicts rise and fall across Africa, one truth remains constant. Wars are not won by holding ground alone. They are won by changing momentum. And what happened in Titao signals a deeper transformation underway in Burkina Faso under the leadership of Ibrahim Traore. Not long ago, Titao was repeatedly targeted because of its strategic location in the northern corridor of the country. Armed groups sought to disrupt supply lines and intimidate civilians. Markets closed, families relocated, administrative services slowed. The security posture at the time was largely defensive. Forces were often positioned to absorb attacks rather than to dismantle the enemy's capacity to strike. But when a town stops reacting and starts responding with initiative, everything changes. Titao became that turning point. It demonstrated that holding territory is not enough. One must control movement, disrupt logistics, and pursue threats beyond immediate contact. For men who understand strategy from decades of observing history, that shift from passive defense to active pursuit marks the beginning of strategic recovery. The transformation in Burkina Faso did not begin with speeches. It began with a change in posture. Under Ibrahim Traore, the military doctrine gradually shifted from static defense to proactive engagement. Instead of waiting behind fortified positions for the next attack, units were reorganized to identify, track, and dismantle hostile networks before they could regroup. This shift may sound technical, but its meaning is simple. In the past, security forces often concentrated on protecting key towns and installations. Armed groups exploited open spaces, moved through rural corridors, and returned after each confrontation. The cycle repeated. The new doctrine aims to break that cycle. It focuses on disrupting supply routes, destroying logistics bases, and striking concentrations of fighters when they are most vulnerable. Speed became essential. Reaction time was reduced. Intelligence gathering was strengthened. Coordination between ground units improved. Rather than operating in isolation, forces began to function as interconnected elements of a broader strategy. Mobility replaced rigidity. Initiative replaced hesitation. For men who have followed military history, this approach reflects a classic principle. You do not defeat insurgent movements by absorbing blows indefinitely. You defeat them by denying them sanctuary, mobility, and confidence. That is the essence of strategic initiative. Titao illustrates this doctrine in action. When pressure was applied, it was not limited to defending streets. Pursuit extended beyond immediate contact zones. Logistics were targeted. Escape routes were monitored. The message was clear. The state would no longer simply endure attacks. It would pursue those responsible and dismantle their operational capacity. This is not merely a tactical adjustment. It represents a deeper belief that national survival requires self-reliance, disciplined coordination, and sustained pressure. For Burkina Faso, the battlefield became a proving ground for a doctrine built on regaining control rather than reacting to loss. No doctrine succeeds without coordination. Strategy on paper means little unless different forces operate as a single body. In Titao, the visible change was not only aggression, it was cooperation. The Forces de Défense et de Sécurité, the volunteers for the defense of the homeland, and the air component began operating in a synchronized pattern that closed gaps once exploited by armed groups. The National Defense Forces provide structure and discipline. They are trained for sustained operations, perimeter control, and organized assaults. Their presence ensures continuity and command authority. But in vast rural terrain, knowledge of local geography is invaluable. That is where the volunteers play a decisive role. They understand villages, paths, seasonal routes, and subtle changes in community behavior. They act as early warning layers and reinforce territorial awareness. Above them, the air component adds reach. When hostile elements attempt to disperse or retreat into remote zones, aerial surveillance and targeted strikes reduce the advantage of mobility. Instead of escaping to reorganize, armed groups face the risk of interception. This integration creates a tightening circle. Ground forces fix the threat in place. Volunteers prevent infiltration into communities. Air assets limit retreat options. For observers with decades of experience studying security challenges, this model reflects combined arms logic adapted to local realities. It does not rely on overwhelming numbers alone. It relies on timing, communication, and shared objectives. Titao demonstrated this clearly. Engagement did not stop at the first clash. Follow-through operations disrupted escape corridors, material was seized, momentum shifted. The message carried beyond the town itself. The state was learning to operate as a unified force rather than as separated units responding independently. Such coordination builds credibility. It shows that institutional learning is taking place, and in long conflicts, institutional learning often determines whether a nation stagnates or regains control of its destiny. Beyond tactics and coordination, there is another battlefield that often determines the outcome of long conflicts. It is the psychological battlefield. In places like Titao, fear once dictated behavior, shops closed early, travel routes were avoided, rumors spread faster than facts. In such conditions, even a small attack could create disproportionate panic. When security forces shift from passive defense to visible control, the psychological balance begins to change. In Titao, daily activity gradually resumed, markets reopened, mechanics returned to their garages, food vendors resumed service. These may seem like small details, but for any seasoned observer, they represent strategic indicators. Stability is measured not only in territory held, but in normal life restored. There is a phrase often repeated in conflict zones: fear has changed sides. That phrase carries weight. When armed groups realize they can no longer strike and withdraw freely, their aura of inevitability weakens. When civilians feel the state is present and responsive, cooperation improves. Information flows more reliably. Suspicion decreases. Confidence slowly rebuilds. For older generations who have lived through periods of instability, this psychological shift is deeply significant. Security is not simply the absence of gunfire, it is the return of routine. It is the confidence to invest, to cultivate land, to send grandchildren to school without constant anxiety. Titao illustrates that regaining initiative is not only about neutralizing threats, and it is about restoring dignity. When citizens see coordinated patrols, functioning administration, and government representatives visiting openly, the message resonates. The state is not retreating. It is asserting continuity in prolonged conflicts. Morale often determines endurance. A community that believes recovery is possible will resist intimidation more effectively than one resigned to decline. The stabilization of Titao therefore extends beyond military calculations. It reflects a rebuilding of trust between security forces and the population. a foundation that no doctrine can succeed without. Numbers alone do not win wars, but they help measure direction. In recent briefings, authorities have indicated that approximately 74% of national territory is now under state control. While figures can fluctuate in complex conflicts, the broader signal is important. The state is expanding presence rather than contracting. In practical terms, control is not defined solely by patrols. It is defined by administration returning, schools reopening, health centers functioning, local officials operating without constant evacuation. In several recovered zones, public services have resumed gradually. This matters more than headlines. Territory becomes meaningful when civilians can live and work under institutional protection. For seasoned observers, the distinction between temporary clearance and durable control is critical. A town can be secured for days. Sustainable stability requires weeks and months of consistent presence. Titao offers a case study in this progression. After security operations stabilized the area, attention shifted toward logistics, humanitarian assistance, and one needs infrastructure support. Reports have highlighted the reopening of local markets and renewed activity in essential services. Medical supplies were reinforced. Administrative supervision vehicles were deployed. Such measures signal that military initiative is being paired with civil reinforcement. This integration strengthens strategic initiative. When armed groups lose logistical bases and mobility while the population regains services, their influence narrows. Momentum shifts not only on the battlefield but in daily life. For men who have witnessed cycles of instability, this combination of territorial recovery and civic restoration suggests more than a temporary victory. It indicates an attempt to consolidate gains and prevent relapse. In long security struggles, consolidation often proves harder than combat. If maintained, these developments reinforce the perception that Burkina Faso is gradually reclaiming strategic ground rather than merely reacting to threats. Any strategic shift invites scrutiny. In the case of Burkina Faso, reactions from Western governments and international organizations have been mixed. Some observers express concern about political centralization, media restrictions, and the potential for human rights violations during intensified counterterrorism operations. Others question the country's evolving partnerships and its move toward greater strategic autonomy. These criticisms deserve acknowledgement. In prolonged conflicts, rapid security measures can create tensions between efficiency and accountability. Civilian protection, legal oversight, and transparent investigations remain essential for long-term legitimacy. No military doctrine can endure if it alienates the population it seeks to defend. However, there is also another dimension that is often overlooked. For a nation confronting persistent armed violence, survival becomes the primary obligation of leadership. When communities face repeated attacks, the demand for decisive action grows stronger. Many within Burkina Faso argue that restoring security is a prerequisite for rebuilding democratic processes and economic stability. The debate, therefore, is not simply about alignment with one bloc or another. It is about sequencing priorities: stability first, reform alongside consolidation, and gradual normalization once security is sustained. For experienced observers, the critical question is balance. Can Burkina Faso maintain firm operations while reinforcing discipline and institutional accountability? If it succeeds, criticism may soften over time. If it fails, doubts will intensify. The durability of the new doctrine will depend not only on battlefield results, but on measured governance and responsible command. Leadership shapes doctrine, but doctrine also shapes legacy. In the case of Burkina Faso, the security evolution unfolding in Titao has become closely associated with the direction set by Captain Ibrahim Traore. His message has consistently emphasized sovereignty, self-reliance, and the determination to restore territorial integrity without hesitation. For many citizens, particularly those who have lived through repeated instability, this tone resonates deeply. Titao now symbolizes more than a stabilized town. It represents an argument that initiative can be regained, an argument that coordinated national effort can reverse momentum. Within broader conversations about Pan-African identity and regional cooperation, such developments feed into larger narratives about autonomy and shared destiny. Discussions of Pan-African renewal, the role of the African Union, and the vision of a more confident Africa New are increasingly connected to cases like this. Yet symbolism must be sustained by results. The durability of change depends on consistency, discipline, and responsible governance. If the coordination between security forces, volunteers, and civil institutions continues, Titao may serve as a reference point for other nations confronting similar threats. For other African states facing insurgent violence, several lessons emerge. First, initiative matters. Waiting indefinitely erodes morale. Second, integration between security operations and civil restoration is essential. Third, information management must accompany military action. Public confidence strengthens resilience. Finally, sovereignty must be paired with accountability, because legitimacy is the strongest long-term defense. As Burkina Faso moves forward, the path remains complex, but the shift visible in Titao suggests that strategic momentum can change direction. Whether this transformation endures will depend on leadership, institutional maturity, and the collective resolve of the nation, in the spirit of Pan-African cooperation and responsible state-building. The experience of Titao contributes to an evolving conversation about security and independence across the continent. Burkina Faso, under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore, presents a case that will continue to be studied by supporters and critics alike. The outcome will shape not only one town, but perceptions of possibility in a changing Africa New landscape.